Right now, in Russia, the going rate for a man's signature is 1.65 million rubles. That is the average bonus a Russian region pays a man who agrees to fight in Ukraine. It is an all-time high. It is also more than the average Russian worker earns in a year. Here's the thing about paying that much. It works. Russia has kept its army supplied for almost 4 years without a general call-up. It did that by outbidding its own civilian economy for men. And here's the problem. In the first 3 months of this year, Russia paid those bonuses to 71,000 men. That is the lowest first-quarter figure in 3 years. Paying more, getting fewer. So we want to ask a question that most coverage skips. You are the Kremlin. Buying soldiers has become this expensive. What is the cheapest way to get the next 300,000? The answer is that you stop buying them. You take them. And that reframes the whole story. It means the mobilization everyone expects this October may not be a military decision at all. It may be a budget decision. This is the Veritas Brief, the podcast from Veritas Europaea. We are the reader-funded publication covering European political economy. We follow the money and the machinery underneath the headlines. We take no advertising. We run no sponsored content. Our members pay for this, and that is the only reason it exists. Today we examine the rumor that Russia mobilizes again this autumn, straight after its parliamentary elections. But we will not spend 20 minutes on whether it happens. Plenty of people are doing that already. We want something more durable. We want to look at the labor market any call-up must draw from. And we want to look at what mobilization does to the one industry Russia cannot afford to break. Its arms factories. Let us start with what we actually know. In late June, 2 independent Russian outlets reported something specific. Meduza and Verstka said officials were discussing mobilization at every level of government. Their sources were careful. They stressed that Vladimir Putin had made no final decision. But one source oversees recruitment at a Russian state corporation. He described preparations running for months. He called it groundwork for something that will never be called a mobilization. Hold on to that phrasing. It does a lot of work. The timing everyone points to is October. That sits immediately after Russia's State Duma elections, held from the 18th to the 20th of September. The logic is simple. You do not announce an unpopular call-up before a vote. Now the Kremlin denies all of it. Dmitry Medvedev called the reports nonsense and a Ukrainian provocation. He pointed to roughly 200,000 new military contracts signed in the first half of this year. Duma Defense Committee members said the same thing. Russia, they said, has no need for mobilization today. That word, today, is the interesting one. Officials issued almost identical assurances in September 2022. The partial mobilization began days later. So let us be honest about what is established. The machinery exists. Russia runs an electronic conscription register. It has the training grounds and the travel restrictions. The scale and the decision are not established. Ukraine's Center for Countering Disinformation claims a target above 500,000. We treat that as an interested estimate, because it is one. Western analysts split roughly down the middle. The Delphi Global Research Center put the odds at about even. The Russian historian Sergei Lukashevsky went further. He told Denyk N, and we quote, "I would even venture to say that it is almost inevitable." So, genuine uncertainty on timing, genuine uncertainty on scale. Which is exactly why we want to change the question. Instead of asking whether Russia mobilizes, ask what Russia would mobilize from. Russia's unemployment rate in June was 2.2%. Usually a government reporting 2% unemployment is boasting. Here it reads closer to a warning label. Look at the underlying numbers. Russia's labor force stands at 76.5 million people. Employment has hit 74.8 million, a record. Only 1.7 million Russians count as unemployed nationwide. That is not slack. That is an economy pressed flat against its ceiling. Ekaterina Vlasova covers Russia for Bloomberg Economics. She put it about as plainly as it can be put. Quote, "The problem is not a lack of jobs, but a lack of workers." And this is not only a foreign analyst's framing. Russia's own central bank says much the same. Elvira Nabiullina calls the shortage unprecedented in Russia's modern history. She describes a structural break, not a passing cycle. Speaking in April, she said, quote, "This is a new reality for the government and for business alike. That matters for one practical reason. When employers compete for scarce staff, wages outrun productivity. That gap feeds straight into inflation. It explains why Russia's key rate still sits at 14%. Now, how big is the hole? Here the estimates genuinely conflict, and we will not pretend otherwise. Official projections say 3.1 million missing workers by 2030. Some Russian analysts cite 4.8 million right now. The Labor Ministry frames it differently again. It says Russia needs 10.9 million new workers by 2030. Those are not the same measure, but every one of them points the same direction. Underneath all of it sits a number that no policy can touch. Vladimir Milov is an opposition politician and an economist. We flag that because his figures carry real weight here. He calculates that Russia holds no more than 19.4 million men aged 20 to 39. That is roughly 13% of the population. 19.4 million. That is the whole pool. The front draws from it. The arms factories draw from it. The civilian economy that funds both draws from it too. 3 claimants, 1 pool, and it is shrinking. Analysts expect the 20 to 40 age group to contract by about a third by 2032. Russian fertility fell to 1.37 last year, the lowest in nearly 2 decades. Russia classified most of its demographic statistics in mid-2025. We think that tells you something on its own. So how has Russia kept a front supplied without touching that pool by force? It bought its way around the problem. Since 2022, the Kremlin has avoided compulsion by paying volunteers extraordinary sums. And we can watch that strategy hit its limit in the budget data. Here is how, and the method is genuinely clever. Janis Kluge works at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. He tracks federal spending on sign-on bonuses. The federal bonus is fixed at 400,000 rubles per contract. Divide the spending by the bonus. You get the number of new contracts. That leaves a paper trail the Kremlin cannot easily massage. The trail says this. First quarter of 2024, 73,000 contracts. First quarter of 2025, 89,600. First quarter of this year, 71,000. A 3-year low. Roughly 800 signups a day, stabilizing near 1,000 in the second quarter. That rate replaces losses. It does not expand an army. Now hold that against the price. Average regional bonuses reached 1.65 million rubles this month. Kluge puts the average actually paid closer to 1.8. Set that against Russia's average monthly wage of about 112,000 rubles. Do the arithmetic. One bonus now exceeds an entire year of average earnings. The regions carry most of that. Many spend between 2 and 4% of their budgets on recruitment. Some spend as much as 10%. That money does not go to roads or hospitals. And it goes further still. 56 Russian regions now pay bounties to people who bring in recruits. A year ago, 31 did. Some offer up to 1 million rubles per delivered man. That is not a recruitment system. That is a bidding war, and the budget is losing it. We are going to pause for 1 minute, and we want to be straight with you about why. Everything so far came from budget documents, central bank statements, and named expert analysis. Somebody had to sit with Russian Finance Ministry spending data and work out what it implies. Somebody had to check conflicting labor shortage estimates, then decide to report the conflict rather than pick the tidiest number. That takes days, and nobody pays us to do it except you. Veritas Europaea carries no advertising. We run no sponsored content. No defense contractor, no think tank, and no government has any claim on what we publish. That independence is not a slogan. It follows directly from how we are funded. So if this is the analysis you want more of, become a member at veritaseuropaea.eu. And we want to be clear about what membership is, because it is unusual. It is not a paywall pass. Every article we publish stays open to everybody, member or not. Membership is patronage. You are not buying access. You are funding the research time that makes the work possible. That covers readers who cannot pay, as well as yourself. If that appeals to you, the link sits in the show notes. Right, back to the argument. And this is the part we think most coverage misses. Almost everyone treats mobilization as a military decision. Generals need bodies, so the state supplies bodies. The budget data supports a second reading running alongside that one. Think about what a mobilized man actually costs. A contract soldier costs the state 1.65 million rubles before he does anything at all. A mobilized man costs nothing to acquire. He receives no bonus. He gets a summons. So mobilization is not only a way to get more men, it is a way to stop paying the going rate for them. It converts a market transaction into an administrative one. For a treasury under strain, that is an attractive property. Now this carries an uncomfortable implication. We want to state it plainly rather than bury it. If compulsion is the cheap option, then fiscal pressure on Russia does not straightforwardly reduce the risk of a call-up. It may increase it. European sanctions policy largely assumes the opposite: squeeze the money, constrain the war. That logic holds for equipment, imports, and technology. We are less sure it holds for manpower. To be fair, serious people disagree with us. Maxime Beznosiuk and William Dixon argued the opposite in foreign policy. They contend the Russian treasury is already too strained to fund serious new mobilization. We think both things can hold at once. Compulsion is cheap. Equipping and training the compelled is not. But here is the part that really matters. It is why we called this a slow burn rather than a shock. The cost does not disappear. It moves. A mobilized man still leaves a payroll. His employer still has to replace him. And he must do that in a country with 1.7 million unemployed people in total. So the state saves 1.65 million rubles. The firm pays an unbudgeted wage premium to backfill the role. That premium passes into prices. It shows up as inflation. It shows up in the fight to bring the key rate down. The saving is real. It is also partial. Mobilization migrates cost off the federal balance sheet and onto the corporate sector. From there, it reaches every Russian household. That is not a collapse. It is a permanent tax on productive capacity. Which brings us to the group that loses in every version of this story: Russia's arms industry. The defense industrial complex employs roughly 2 million people across about 1,300 entities, and it is already short of staff. Officials acknowledged a gap of 160,000 workers back in 2024. Denis Manturov was then deputy prime minister. He projected that gap widening to 240,000 by this year. About 80,000 of those vacancies require engineers. Independent estimates run higher: 400 to 500,000, including more than 100,000 skilled specialists. Now here is the single most important detail in this whole story. The shortage is not generic, it is specific. Russia is not short of warm bodies for its factories. It is short of turners, of computer-controlled machine tool operators, of toolmakers and design engineers. Those skills take years to build, and no signing bonus, at any price, manufactures a machinist in a quarter. You see the same pattern in drones. Russia's civilian drone sector reports a shortfall of 14,500 specialists. The military side looks worse. The conflict intelligence team tracked drone training this year. The Defense Ministry trained just over 8,000 specialists in the first half of 2026. Its target was 34,400. About a quarter of plan. So now, put the pieces together. The front needs men. An anonymous Russian general told the Moscow Times what taking all of Donbass would require: replacing 55 to 60,000 casualties every month. The factories need machinists and engineers. The civilian economy needs everyone else because it generates the tax base funding the other two. And all three draw on the same 19.4 million men. Every soldier mobilized is a worker not working. Under a summons-driven call-up, he may be a worker the defense sector desperately wanted. That deserves a moment because it is subtle. Contract recruitment self-selects. It pulls disproportionately from low-income regions, from men whose civilian wages fall far below the bonus. Economically, the state has been removing lower productivity labor and paying a very high price for it. A summons-driven call-up inverts that. Summonses follow administrative lists, not wage differentials. They take whoever the register names, including the skilled men the plants cannot replace. We saw this in 2022. Conscription fell mainly on poorly educated men from small towns. Emigration hit the opposite group entirely. Up to 1 million military-age men left the country. And one more wrinkle complicates every scenario. Uralvagonzavod is Russia's flagship tank manufacturer. It announced roughly 10% workforce cuts and a hiring freeze. Some divisions had already moved to a 4-day week. Management pointed to weak civilian railcar demand. Whatever the cause, the direction is the same. Russia's arms plants are not scaling headcount for a troop surge. The Russian military analyst Dmitry Kuznets addressed the consequence directly. New reserve regiments would form quickly, he said. But those units, and we quote, would not be able to operate effectively. More men, not proportionally more equipment, not proportionally more training. So where does this leave us? We frame the next 6 months as 3 paths, not one prediction. 1. Silent escalation. The Kremlin intensifies coercive recruitment with no decree at all. It uses registers, criminal law, university quotas, and regional pressure. Damage accumulates slowly. Everything stays deniable. 2. A limited call-up, somewhere between 100 and 300,000. Moscow frames it as a reserve refresh. Growth stalls near zero. Emigration resumes. Regional budgets get relief from the bonus bill. 3. Mass mobilization above 500,000. This carries the widest gap between military ambition and industrial capacity. On current evidence, we give it the lowest probability. And note that Scenario 1 already describes observable reality. For European listeners, 3 implications we think get under-discussed. First, migration. A second call-up would push tens or hundreds of thousands of men outward. Kazakhstan, Georgia, Armenia, Serbia, and the EU periphery absorbed the 2022 wave. European interior ministries should settle visa and asylum positions before October, not after. Second, threat assessment. A manpower-heavy, equipment-constrained Russian force implies a different rearmament timeline. Planners who model troop numbers alone will overstate Russian capability. Planners who model industrial output alone will understate Russian persistence. Third, sanctions design. Fiscal pressure may make compulsion relatively cheaper than recruitment. If so, sanctions could change the form of Russian escalation rather than its scale. That is not an argument against sanctions. It is an argument for expecting a manpower response, not a retreat. Before we close, we want to do something more analysis should do. We want to tell you where this argument is weakest. Russian labor data has real limits. That 2.2% unemployment rate excludes informal underemployment. It also counts mobilized men as employed, which flatters the picture considerably. The recruitment estimates rest on assumptions. Kluj's regional sample covers 40 regions and about 47% of the population. Casualty and mobilization scale figures come largely from Ukrainian and Western sources with obvious interests. We have labeled them throughout, and you should discount accordingly. And here is the strongest counter-argument, which cuts against us directly. Russia's own central bank reports that labor market tightness is easing. The share of firms citing worker shortages has fallen to its lowest level since mid-2023. If that is real, mobilization is economically cheaper than we have argued here. We do not think it changes the demographic floor. 19.4 million men is 19.4 million men, but it would soften the near-term squeeze. We would rather tell you that than pretend the evidence runs one way. Here is what we would leave you with. Russia can mobilize men. Russia cannot mobilize machinists. It cannot mobilize engineers. And it certainly cannot mobilize the births that did not happen in the 1990s. Every path in front of the Kremlin now spends the same scarce resource. The only real choice is where to spend it. That constraint will outlast this war. It will outlast the sanctions regime. We think it will outlast the current leadership. A call-up in October would not create that constraint. It would just make it visible. The written version of this analysis sits on our site with 5 charts. Recruitment costs, the wage data, and the sectoral labor gaps. Every source we used is linked there. This has been the Veritas Brief from Veritas Europaea. We are reader-funded, we take no articles, and every article stays free to read. If today was useful, send it to one person who would argue with it. We will see you next time.